asked what is the final aim of the tantric process, it was as simply as you may put it that, the standard idea of moksha, liberation is of course there, but here there are various states of liberation. So Bhairava was the central deity in the Bhairava Tantra. So eventually it was believed that from Bhairava, it's a more esoteric path, a more exclusive and faster and perhaps a more beneficial path was worship of the Shakti of Bhairava. Shakti of Bhairava is where Shakta Tantra comes in for the first time. India, and that included the temple of Kamakhya, where a very specific kind of Shakta Tantra known as the Kaula system, the Kaula Tantra came about. So eventually what happened, all of them got intermingled. Namaste. Perhaps around. So I will be explaining briefly from the genesis how Shakta Tantra came about and how it is practiced in today's times. It will be a brief history. So at the very beginning of, there are various scholarly opinions of how, Tantra came about. Some people tend to believe that it was a parallel path along with the Vedic path and things like that. But what the evidence that we have as of now very clearly indicates that in the earlier half of the last millennium in Kashmir, where there was the first what is known as the Shiva Tantra, systems of Kashmiri Shaivism, and the tantric aspects of that were developed. From that, there was an offshoot, at least of, now I'm not going into the details of Shiva Tantra because this talk is specifically about Shakti Tantra. So in Shaivism, Shiva Tantra, there were at least a few divisions, few parallel lines of development in which there was one stream of scriptures and practices that were related to Bhairava as the supreme deity. And these were known as the non-dual tantras. Non-dual because eventually it comes to the position where the Upasaka feels a oneness with the deity. So that's way, in that sense, it is non-dual. Mind you, it is not to be confused with the Advaita Vedanta of the Vedantic stream. There are certain philosophical and practical differences in the paths. But from the Bhairava Tantras, eventually, an offshoot came about. Offshoot in the sense that it was believed that as the Bhairava Tantras progressed, well, Bhairava was the central deity in the Bhairava Tantras. So eventually it was believed that from Bhairava, it's a more esoteric path, a more exclusive and faster and perhaps a more beneficial path was worship of the Shakti of Bhairava. Shakti of Bhairava is where Shakta Tantra comes in for the first time. And that included, worship of different forms of the goddess, whether it's Kali, whether it's Tripur Sundari, and there were various other more complex forms that used to be worshipped along with the pantheon of yoginis, etc. And in doing so, they derived a lot of practices which were there in the earlier Pashupat Shaivism, in the earlier Kapalika Shaivism, etc. And they integrated that along with a new method of sadhana. Method was basically, the idea was that while there is a certain amount of rules and regulations that we follow in normal society and normal life, in this stream of Shakti Upasana, and Shakti Upasana had its own variations and substreams, etc. So one of the aspects was that it integrated those elements which are considered as more heterodox, that is not considered as a part of the normal Vedic pantheon of worship, Vedic system of worship, to put it that way. So there used to be use of, for example, one of the older texts mentioned that for certain practices of Bhairava, you can even offer ritually sanctified alcohol to the deity, which is completely abhorrent to the standard Vedic path of worship. So that was one stream from where the Shakti Tantra developed. Parallelly, there was another stream that developed from the eastern India, perhaps around the temple of Kamakhya, where a very specific kind of Shakti Tantra known as the Kaula system, the Kaula Tantra came about. So eventually what happened, all of them got intermingled. Perhaps around 10th century onwards, worship of Shakti as a primary deity instead of just, Shakti as a projection from Shiva, which was the original conception of Shakti Upasana in the Shiva Tantra. Here Shakti becomes the primary deity, the main Ishta who has to be approached for all material as well as spiritual benefits of the Upasaka. Around 9th, 10th century, it started off as an own stream of its own, along with a lot of scriptures that were written after that, and those which we specifically known as the word Tantra today. So, Tantra is a specific technique of worship. That is where Tantra differs from everything else. So it is not necessary, it's not enough to have only, look at system of worship as merely a form of bhakti movement, as having devotion to the deity, which is of course there, that is a primary prerequisite, no doubt. But where Tantra differs is that there is a certain amount of technicality in which the Upasana is approached, in which the deity is approached. One of the primary things in the Tantric scriptures, as opposed to, for example, the Puranic scriptures, which is more mainstream religious currents that we had in India, is, for example, you'll see that there is very little about the history of the, not just history, or how would you put it, very little about the stories of the gods, stories of the deities. If you look at a Purana related to a specific deity, you'll find it'll start off with when creation happened, then what are the different plays, the leelas that the deity has performed, etc., etc. Then you will have sections on different lineages of divine beings, rishis or kings, etc. Tantra, on the other hand, a typical tantric text does not go into the history of the deity too much. It straight away will start with a section which tells you why guru is important, what are the lakshanas of a guru, what are the lakshanas of a disciple, what is the system of entry into the tantric path. So that means what are the requisites and methods of Diksha, and then it goes straight into the upasana of the deity. Because of this reason, the tantras, specifically the Shakta Tantras, were regarded as a path of upasana, path of sadhana, more than the philosophical aspect. So it is important to mention here that while there was initially a very broad, it started off with that same philosophical base on which Shiva Tantra of Kashmir was there, the 36 tattvas of Kashmir of Shaivism was also there. Eventually it resulted more on the focus of sadhana actually than contemplation of the philosophy. We find evidence of this from texts around 15th, 16th century, which, for example, there's a very interesting statement in one of the tantras of 15th century, which states that there is Shiva and there is Parvati speaking, and there's Parvati asking Shiva that of the 6 different philosophies that is there, the 6 main philosophies of dharma that is there, which of them is the most accurate one? And Shiva just says that, the 6 philosophies have been made to confuse people so that they keep arguing which of them is greater. Instead of that, if you keep practicing the upasana and you enter into a state that is beyond the normal mind, then you yourself will see the reality as it is. This, in effect, was the basic idea on which the basic concept on which the way in which progression of Tantra happened. So it's not that there was no philosophy, but philosophical aspect was considered as secondary to the actual practice of the system. So as you practice, it causes a change inside you. It causes a change in your mind and your perspective of things. And as the changes happen, therefore you will also understand how, what exactly is the deity, how you relate to the world, how the deity relates to the world, what is the supreme state that you have to reach, etc., etc. And if someone asked what is the final aim of the tantric process, it was as simply as you may put it that, the standard idea of moksha, liberation is of course there, but here there are various states of liberation possible. So at the initial very old tantras, they do mention, for example, that it's when the deity actually enters into the upasaka and stays within the upasaka. So the upasaka is basically no more just a human being. He becomes the deity in effect, in the consciousness, in his mind. That is the highest state, because in that state, like a living deity in this world, you are free from the bondages, you are free from sorrows and sufferings and things like that, and you have a superhuman consciousness. So consciousness is sort of the rough English equivalent of what was being aimed at. And to attain that, the primary deity that the tantras looked at was some or the other form of the divine mother. Now,